Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, sponsored by the National Health Association. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and today I'm absolutely delighted to have as my guest Bobby Sud. Bobby's an animal rights photographer, cinematographer, who's really very much involved in documenting really the atrocities in this animal food production industry, and also highlighting the benefits of plant-based living for people really wanting to reverse and resolve serious health issues. So, Bobby, welcome. I'm so delighted to have you here. Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association, the oldest organization in the world championing the extraordinary benefits of a whole plant food diet and healthy lifestyle, as well as water-only fasting. We believe that health results from healthful living and focus on evidence-based science that promotes the health of you and your loved ones, as well as the health of all animals and the environment. We feature experts from a cross-section of disciplines within the plant nutrition, vegan, psychological, environmental, and animal compassion sectors. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, the NHA's Director of Health Education.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
I was just really so blown away, truthfully, reading all the things that you had gotten involved in. So before we get into some of that, I'd like to go into a little bit of the backstory, because people are always kind of interested how people make their transitions into this vegan way of living, so to speak. And I know you were inspired by your brother. I know there were health issues and weight issues and even some addiction issues in the past associated with that journey. Can you share a little bit of that with the audience so they get a sense of, where you're coming from?
Yeah, I was 300 pounds, type 2 diabetic, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, hypertension, everything that goes along with eating a standard American diet in excess. And I was living in Austin at the time. My brother was in LA, and he'd been living a plant-based lifestyle for about 3 years at that time, and he had completely transformed his life. And he had been asking me for a while if I would consider moving out to LA to be with him and adopt a plant-based lifestyle like he did. And it took 3 years for me to finally say yes. And which from hindsight, it seems weird, right? Because he's my identical twin brother and I saw what it did for him. And so I should have said immediately, oh, I want that. But people don't realize when your health is so poor, and your life is so bankrupt in terms of purpose and meaning and connection, and the only pleasure, the only joy you're experiencing in life is the food you're eating, because you've completely isolated yourself. Because this was the first time in my life, at least for those 8 years, that I experienced such poor health. I was always a healthy person. I was a 3-sport athlete, and it wasn't until after college that my health got out of control. And it's a scary proposition to say to someone, even to your identical twin brother, I'm going to trust that you're telling me the truth, and I'm going to risk giving up the only source of joy in my life. And I'm going to believe you that after, a certain amount of time, that the joy will find its way back into my life somewhere else. And I really hope that people understand how terrifying that is. And why it's so hard for some people to finally say yes.
Well, it's a big step. It's an interesting thing when you use the word joy, because was it really joyful? I mean, you were suffering, you had weight issues,
really not.
And you had your patterns. Of course, we have our own compulsivities and addictions and things that we kind of hold on to. But was it really a joyful time that you were giving up?
No, it absolutely wasn't. But that was just, my brain was saying, "Ooh, look at all this dopamine," because it was all that together,
Yeah, that's the problem with even addictive patterns. You get that brain reward cascade kicks in the brain, and you start to believe those things are necessary for survival. It tricks the more controlling part of that brain, puts you in that reactive, middle brain mode where all addiction resides. And so this all happened after you had already been through the Savannah School of Art and Design. You already were on a path into filmmaking and some of those kinds of things. So you were doing that in Austin already? Was that happening in Austin?
But it wasn't. I was working for this this company where we were interviewing people who wanted to tell their life story because they believed they had an interesting life story to leave behind. And I did interview some interesting people, but it was incredibly boring. And it was really just for a paycheck. And I had this delusion that new work would find me, that I wouldn't have to go and find it, and finally I had no reason to tell my brother no,
Right.
and so I left all that behind and moved to LA.
Yeah, which is it's a big move in itself. I gather that in your journey, one of the big things that happened, it was funny, years ago, back around 2012, I was working in centers where we're doing this kind of work, plant-based work. I've been doing it for 50 years. But I had pitched to a network something that you actually brought to fruition, which was almost like an Anthony Bourdain show, just about vegan eating and cultures around the world. And you created this Road Less Eaten. Talk about that, how that happened, because that seemed to be kind of a big turning point in your path as a photographer, cinematographer. It was a big step. So talk a little bit about that.
That was exciting. That was something I wish, could have continued. I think that we were just a little early. But after
I got turned down for the same reason. It was too niche-y. It was like it's a niche. Nobody wants this, and so you put it in motion, but you ran into the same roadblock.
Yeah, at that time there was no advertising attached to a show like that, and streaming wasn't really doing anything. So, but I guess it had been about 8 months, and I had already lost probably 80 pounds and reversed my diabetes and all that, and I was very much getting immersed in plant-based culture in America. And I was wondering what it was like in other countries, because people always say, oh, well, you're going to travel there. What are you going to eat? It's like there's only one country I know of that eats more meat than America, Argentina. Right. Everywhere eats vegetables, but I wanted to see how they do that and how their culture embraces that. And so a friend of mine who was an actress, Ali Eisman, I asked her to host a show, and we shot an episode in Israel, which at the time I think is still per capita the most vegan country in the world. And then we picked Ireland as the other bookend, as the place that's usually behind in culinary culture. And it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. We experienced the food and the culture and the pop culture, and it was great.
Yeah, I mean, you shot right in those places, so the budget must have been pretty amazing to have to get all that together, because you had to travel, you had to go to these places, and it wasn't like back doors, all over the world.
Right. I actually financed that myself, so we kept a very low budget. Thankfully, I had all the equipment myself, so I just hired another cinematographer to help me shoot it. Is also.
And I didn't see it, but was it very much like an Anthony Bourdainish kind of show? Were you like in with the people, cultural stuff, and hanging out?
Anthony Bourdain was certainly my inspiration for the show,
right.
But it's hard to find someone who can wax poetic like Bourdain could.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But we tried.
That's just because you're not an old heroin addict that worked in kitchens. That's why.
True. Yeah.
That's probably why. So yeah, so what came out of that for you? I know it didn't last because it had to come to an end. That must have felt like a little bit of a loss, because it sounded like it was a party. It sounded like it was fun.
It was fun, and we talked with NBC and Travel Channel, and we had meetings with them, and all of them loved it, because basically every travel show and every food show at the time was the same thing, just wrapped in different packaging, right? And so this was something different. And it wasn't pushing so much a vegan agenda as it was pushing, this is good food, right? And people having a good time, it doesn't matter how, right? And so they all loved it, but they said, what advertising can we attach to this show? Because at the time, I think only Silk had commercials, and that was it.
Right.
And so that's kind of where it died. But the good thing was that people like Sean Monson and people like Sean, Alec Peterson, and were able to see my work, or I was able to present them my work, and I was able to transition into more animal rights filmmaking.
Well, that must have been pretty cool to kind of interface and work with Sean, because some of his projects are just absolutely amazing. So that must have been a really riveting kind of time of your life to kind of collaborate at that level with him.
It was, and I describe it as a dream and a nightmare at the same time. Sean has always been an inspiration to me, and I remember I was in film school when I saw Earthlings for the first time, and I only watched it because a friend of mine had gotten a DVD and said, "Have you heard of this documentary? It's supposed to be impossible to finish. Do you want to try and finish it?" Like, we watched it not for any animal rights reasons, but just because out of morbid curiosity, we wanted to see what it was.
Right.
And then afterwards, I mean, I had never seen anything like it, and it blew my mind. And then to find out that he was out in LA and that I could, go and talk to him, and I show him my work, and he asked me to help him shoot his next film. And just, I couldn't believe it.
Amazing.
But then, of course, day one of filming with Sean was on the kill floor of a slaughterhouse where they were slaughtering cows with halal slaughter methods. It was pretty gruesome.
I'm here with Bobby Sud, and we're talking about his journey with veganism, and we're going to get into his work documenting some of the real atrocities that are out there in terms of animal abuse in the animal food industry. We're going to take just a short break to hear from our sponsor, the National Health Association. You're listening to the NHA Health Science Podcast. Dr. Frank Sabatino here, encouraging you to check out the NHA membership. For just $35 a year in the U.S., and $55 internationally, you'll have access to a wealth of resources, including our quarterly full-color print magazine, Health Science. Stay updated on the latest health tools, inspiring stories, and exclusive events like the NHA Conference and plant-exclusive cruises. Join us at healthscience.org/membership and make a difference in your life and the world. I'm Dr. Frank Sabatino, your host, and now back to the NHA Health Science Podcast, where more exciting insights await you. Welcome back to the Health Science Podcast. I'm here with Bobby Sud. So, Bobby, let's fast forward then, because you became very much involved with the Animal Save movement, which is a really remarkable movement, and then LA Animal Save, really tapping into these vigils that are taking place in slaughterhouses and so on, where you're really right on the front lines of that kind of abuse. Yeah. And, many of us talk about it, we lecture about it, but, we just haven't really been there. And I really think it would be enlightening for the audience to see through your lens, because that's what you do. You've documented this with thousands and thousands of photos and photos of, popular people and celebrities that have been involved in these vigils. Talk about how you got involved in that and the kind of impact that that's had in your life and as a professional doing the work that you do.
Yeah, I was with my brother speaking at SoCal Veg Fest. This was about 10 or 12 months after I had moved out to LA. And he introduces me to a friend of his named John Pierre, who you may know. I
know JP very well, yes.
Okay. So, very special human being, JP. Yes. And my brother tells him that I'm an aspiring filmmaker, and JP asked me if I wanted to go to this pig vigil that his friend and his friend's partner were starting. And I didn't know what that was, what a pig vigil was. I knew that I was passionate about animals, and I hadn't transitioned into helping animals yet. But he also said that his friend is Sean Monson, and that the other people are going to be like Joaquin Phoenix and Moby. And I mean, with all honesty, that's why I went, because I didn't know what else to expect. And I remember I'll never forget the experience of seeing the very first truck the next day outside of the slaughterhouse near downtown LA. And I remember going up to the truck and being inches away from these 200 6-month-old pigs that are going to die, just about to die. The Vernon PD would stop each truck for 2 minutes so that we could give them water and take photos and offer compassion to animals who've never seen it from a human being. And I remember having this experience, and I told Kathleen Gage about this, where as that truck started to drive away and pull into the slaughterhouse, I remember thinking, I don't know what happens after I die. I don't know if there's an afterlife or heaven or reincarnation or nothing at all. But what I am sure of is that I get to be here on this planet as this individual that I am now once. This individual gets one chance to create as much purpose and meaning and connection and love in my life as I can before my one chance is over. And when I watched the truck pull into the gates of the slaughterhouse, I realized that for those 200 individual pigs, that was their one chance. Mm-hmm. And for me, that experience changed everything. I really didn't care about how healthy people were. You know, I started caring, like, okay, how do I stop this from happening? And I was blown away by what that vigil was able to offer me. And so I went to Sean, I showed him my work. I went to his partner, Amy Jean Davis, who's the founder of LA Animal Save, and told her, I want to be a part of this somehow. Just let me know. And I started out just as a photographer, just photographing the pigs when they arrived. And then I eventually became an organizer, and at the same time working with Sean on his films. And that's sort of how it started.
So everything is at the gate, kind of. You're not you're not photographing slaughter. You don't get a chance to really do that.
Not at a vigil, no.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
But you make the point that, you know, when you're on the front lines like that and you're seeing that, there's its own kind of PTSD with that, in the sense that you realize the trauma that's involved in the lives of those creatures and what they're going through. And I've never had a chance to really talk to a photojournalist like we're talking, you and I, because when I think about people that do that work, whether it's on the front of a war or it's some atrocity between humans, or it's the kind of thing that you're doing at a vigil, I always think about, you know, you've got to maintain a certain kind of objectivity and subjectivity simultaneously. And it's got to be difficult sometimes, because you're photographing something you wish you could just reach in and completely change physically, but you have to almost be an observer to that. And talk to me about that process, because I find that a fascinating process, to be that kind of a photojournalist dealing with all of these things in the world, including the animal abuse.
Yeah, that really hit me the very first time I was filming inside a slaughterhouse with Sean. And Sean told me before we go inside, he said, listen, when we go in there, you cannot show any emotion. It's like, you got to have a poker face the entire time. He's always snapping in my face, going, poker face, poker face, poker face. And, you know, the difficult thing is standing on a kill floor when they're killing animals and filming it, and knowing that I am physically capable of going and stopping this person from killing that animal.
Right.
But it wouldn't stop the killing. Right. Well, what happened was they would stop, take my camera, take everything I've shot, you know, call the police, and then that animal would eventually die. And then anything that would have come of it is gone. My job isn't to run in there like a superhero and take out all the slaughterhouse workers and rescue all the animals. My job is to document so that people are able to see what the government doesn't allow them to see.
Right. Well, I'm surprised that they even let you in to do that. What's the process of actually getting in? They must be concerned about what you're going to do with that footage. What are you going to do with the stuff that you're creating? Is there any comment or battle about that? Any stress related to that?
Oh, sure. I mean, so a lot of the times with Sean, we had gotten special permission through certain people to go in. One time we were in Arkansas on a chicken farm that was raising chickens for a very large chicken company. We all know it. You have heard of their name. And I asked him, I said, we go in there and the employees, let's say the employees are all kicking the chickens and throwing them against the wall and doing all these things that are illegal. Let's say that's happening. Right. I said, what happens if they catch us? He said, we go to jail. That's what happens. And so you can't make a fuss. You know, right. we got permission from the owner of the farm that was raising chickens for the company. So as long as the company employees weren't there, we were fine. Right. And if the company employees showed up, we couldn't be seen. Right. And with the cows, we got permission from the slaughterhouse owner that time to go in, because he was trying to show off in a weird way that his way was the way that everyone should be doing it, you know. And we're like, oh, cool, yeah, show us how that.
Wow, what a badge of honor. Seriously, I mean, wow.
Yeah. So yeah, but you've got to play to their ego sometimes,
right?
You know? So
Yeah.
yeah, or you sneak in and hope you don't get caught. And the interesting thing is that on border states, like California and Texas, a lot of the employees are undocumented, and they're not going to raise their voice if they see you, right? They don't want to get in trouble. So I would highly advise not doing something like that in somewhere like North Carolina that has extremely strict gag laws. And I don't advise anybody doing it, but if there are places there's less risk than others.
Yeah, I noticed that as part of that, you've actually photographed celebrities like Joaquin Phoenix at a vigil or people of that nature. And I gather that from what I read, that you've done over like 25,000 photos of all of this stuff that we're talking about that have been featured in places like People Magazine and other places.
Sure, yeah.
What comes out of that that media exposure? What is there something really tangible that you've seen or felt when it's made its way into that kind of a platform, like a People's Magazine, or when you have someone like a Joaquin Phoenix in a picture? What comes out of that you've been able to notice, or have you been able to notice anything from that?
Yeah, when you let the world know that someone like Joaquin Phoenix attends vigils every month, all of a sudden 60 Minutes shows up.
Right.
All of a sudden you're on the front page of the LA Times, and all of a sudden the size of the vigil goes from 200 people to 400 people, right? And those extra people, most of them are there to try and meet Joaquin Phoenix. Who cares?
Doesn't
I don't.
matter. I
Yeah, I
agree.
don't care whatever gets you there.
Right. My
So
feelings, whatever brings you in the fold, I'm cool with that. I think
exactly.
that's amazing thing. Yeah, so that's pretty remarkable. So when we look at that, I know that you've actually transitioned from that too, in terms of the vegan thing, into the animal thing into the. Let me step back. One of the things I read in one of your interviews, and I loved it, because you talk about what motivates people to get involved in veganism, and you
Sure.
talk about the three things, and you talk about the difference between hate and love. And I love the fact that it was one of the ways that you were able to process your own
Yeah.
emotionality about what you were doing by moving into that love space and realizing that hate can't be a foundation for creating a compassionate world. Talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that process for you, because I think it's an amazing thing that people need to think about, because we can be so antagonistic in the ways that we want to bring people into the fold or change the ways that they think and act. And we lose sight of the fact that this whole lifestyle is founded on compassion and love. We lose sight of that. So talk about that, the power of that as it transformed your life and the work that you do.
Yeah, and I think this is really important for anyone who wants to be a frontline activist, who wants to put themselves in those situations uh, multiple times a year or a week. Um, and I've found that it's true that most activists, no matter what their activism is, are motivated by either love or hate, right? And I can't deny that hate is a great motivator, right? And it would be reasonable if I were motivated by hate, considering what I've seen. It'd be a perfectly reasonable response to the things that I've seen, that I'd be motivated by how much I hate that people are killing animals, and how much I hate that slaughterhouses exist, and that people are eating animals, and we're destroying the planet, and we're destroying our health, and people are suffering and animals are suffering. Sure. But then every action I took would be a reminder of just how much hate I have. And hate is exhausting. Right? And whereas if I choose to be motivated by love, right, I choose to be motivated by how much I love animals, how much I love helping them, how much I love saving them occasionally, how much I love that I can help restore the planet and help people find their health and happiness again and change the way they move through the world. If I do that, then every action I take is an affirmation of love and not hate. And where hate is exhausting, love is inspiring and empowering. Right? No
Yes,
one gets worn out by too much love. It never happens. And
absolutely.
in my experience, right, I have never seen evidence of hate, change motivated by hate, creating lasting positive change. I've only seen that when someone is motivated by love, right? Again, this is just in my experience. I'm not saying that's true or false. It's just in my experience.
Well, I agree, because hate to me, stems much more from our ego in a way, in the sense that
Yes.
because it comes from fear and it comes from a lot of other emotions that usually breed disconnection. And a lot of what we're talking about is the fact that we're trying to connect, we're trying to bring things together, not create more, disintegration, if you will. We want
Yes.
to integrate this mentality more. So it's great. Bobby, where can people find you? Give us a URL or a location so they can learn more about the work you're doing, see your work, get turned on to what you're doing. Where can they go for that?
Yeah, my Instagram is best, and that's just at Bobby Sud, and you can see all of my photos and some of my documentary work on there.
Which are actually amazing. I went on and checked
Oh,
some of
thank
it
you.
out. I thought it was awesome work. Seriously,
Thank you so
amazing.
much.
Yeah, amazing work. Let's segue into something else, because we'll move away from the annals just briefly, because you also got involved with trying to bring people the awareness that eating in this plant exclusive vegan way can really reverse many of the major pathologies that many people suffer with. And you created this program, this $1 million vegan program. I want to talk to you about that, because in this you have interviews with people from various walks of life, athletes, soldiers, people of different ilk. Talk to me about how that came to be and what that means to you and how that's progressed.
Yeah, $1 Million Vegan was actually started by Matthew Glover in the UK, who started Veganuary. And he came to the United States and wanted to do a project where we would interview people who had changed their lives and through a plant-based diet, who had reversed their health issues and found their health again.
Right.
And we wanted to do that as a way of inspiring people to just try it for a month, to give up eating meat and dairy for a month. And it was really, it was fantastic. And I think that they're now called Generation Vegan. That video campaign, which is about 80 videos, probably some of the most impactful work I've done in terms of getting people inspired to change.
Where was that? Where do people visualize that? Where do they find that?
On Generation Vegan, they have a website, they have a YouTube page,
I
and they
see.
have
Okay.
an Instagram page. Yeah.
So that's not in play anymore. That was done, and that's a past project, basically.
For me, it is, yes. They
Yeah.
they have other campaigns. That they have one right now that's focused on environment, but that they're doing that in the UK.
I noticed also that you were involved some time back in wanting to put some pieces together. I couldn't find out if they were actually done. You were doing something hell bent really on compulsivity, addiction kind of mentality. Did that ever come to be? Did that ever come to fruition?
Yeah. So that was a project that I was doing with a very, very one of my closest friends. His name is David Clark, and he
Yeah,
was
you talked about him. I felt that you were really heartfelt about David.
yeah. David passed away 4 years ago during from complications during surgery on a herniated disc. But he was a vegan endurance athlete. He ran over 50 100-mile foot races, and he used to be a 320-pound alcoholic who changed his lifestyle the exact same way and found purpose and connection and through running and plant-based eating and helping and inspiring people. And unfortunately, David passed away, and we were not able to finish that project.
Was David in any of those $1 Million Vegan videos?
He is, yes.
Okay. So from all these incredible things that you've done and are continuing to do, what's on the horizon for you? What is it that you'd like to accomplish? Are there projects that are in play right now that you're trying to finish? Tell us a little bit about where you're going and how do you envision what's next for you?
Right now, I'm working on a book, a photography book with all of my photos. And I'm also doing a project with a very good friend of mine, Steve Bellamy, who is a vegan, and he just retired. He was the president of Kodak Motion Pictures.
Wow.
And that documentary project is about creativity. It's not so much a vegan project, but it's been a lot of fun to work on. We've interviewed 40 of the most incredible people, half of which are vegan. And that's sort of where I am right now. I'm hoping that my book will be able to have an impact on reaching people. That the book came about. I was talking with a friend of mine. He was asking what I plan on doing with my photos, and I said, "Well, I thought maybe I could sell some prints as like art prints." And he said, "Listen, I love your photography, but I'm not going to hang it on my wall. Right. And while maybe some people will, I have to agree with him that most people wouldn't. I mean, I get it. I understand. So he said, why don't you do a book? And he's like, that's more digestible. People have books by photojournalists who documented war and things like that. So that
Right.
might, so, and it talks about my journey through LA Animal Save, the 7 years I spent documenting animals while with LA Animal Save.
I think it's fantastic. It sounds like a great project.
Thank
Let
you.
me ask you a question, because both you and your brother have been through, you went to hell and back through addiction and weight and all the things that you both accomplished in your lives. What do you do now? I know you're living as a vegan. Talk a little bit about your process, meaning how does Bobby take care of himself day to day and resolve those demons that sometimes will surface because old patterns will come to the surface? Or is that all in the past and it's not anything that's really, real for you anymore? Where
No,
are you in your own dance, in your own path right now?
a
And what
year
do you
ago,
do? And what do you do for your well-being and how you take care of yourself?
yeah, a year ago, I spent 12 weeks in a mental health clinic, dealing with the PTSD from 7 years of 3 vigils a week and going in slaughterhouses with Sean. And while my approach of love and not hate worked for a while, right? I was concentrating or trying too much to deny any hate that I felt.
Right.
Right, because I wasn't willing to accept that while I'm able to be there because I have that much love for animals, I wasn't willing to accept that I hate what I saw. And when you have nowhere to put hate, it turns inward. And so I spent 12 weeks there, and really it's about being kind with yourself, finding ways that you can wake up every day, and no matter what this is for you, that you can engage in activities that makes you a better person, better version of yourself than you were the day before.
So did
Right?
you have to step back from that for a little period of time just to kind of regroup?
I did, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah, that makes
I've since moved to Austin. I'm not in LA anymore. I'm still working on projects with Moby and a few other people, but remotely.
Yeah, what are those projects about? Like if you work with Moby and people of that ilk, just to get this message out, is that what it's about?
Yeah, I shot animal footage for Moby's documentary called The Punk Rock Vegan Movie, which is about the vegan message that came out of the straight edge punk rock scene in the 60s.
Right.
I'm shooting footage for a project he's doing right now that I can't talk about. I do need to step away from the daily activism for a little while.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm doing now. And instead I'm focusing on things that help me feel better about myself, going to the gym twice a day, really getting back on focusing on eating as healthy as possible. I lost over 100 pounds, and then I transitioned from being extremely low fat plant-based diet to a plant-based diet. Right. And while I didn't gain any weight back, I can definitely feel the difference when I'm eating healthier. And
you need those nuts and avocados and things, baby. They're just an important part of this. And sometimes we try to just avoid those things, but they have a real powerful place in this diet.
Oh, they do. Absolutely.
And I've been teaching that for a long time. So, and I know
Yeah.
that. When you incorporate that, it makes it easier for people to stay on track. It really does, because sometimes you're trying to do these extremes, and that's not what this is about. It's got to be about that self-love too, where you have compassion for yourself too in these transitions and these changes.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you found your way to that, because that's an important piece.
And context matters. I think that's something that the message is missing often. Whether you're in the Esselstyn book or like group, or your Dan Buettner's Blue Zones, right? Context matters. Esselstyn's plan is very good for people who are suffering with extreme obesity and people who already have heart disease. Right. You need to cut that fat out of your diet. You do. People who are going to the gym and healthy every day and want to be vegan, well, it's okay to have some fat. It's fine, but we don't talk about context enough. I think that's something that's missing.
Yeah, I just put a book out and I go into a lot of context, and it's important. Your point is incredibly well made, because you've got to look at what's also going to work for you. I remember years ago, when you first you're almost proselytizing. You're like a preacher when you start out, because you want to change the world and you want to change it fast. and you wind up trying to teach people not where they are, but where you think they should be. And what happens oftentimes is you can turn them off from a path that may actually inspire and change their lives by the way that we share that context. So I love that point. I love that point. It's such an amazing and important point.
I see that in animal rights activism as well, with people who are just want to either go as far as shaming somebody, believing that shaming a stranger is somehow holding them to account. It's not. Or just saying, you can't do that. You must do that. You need to do that. I'm sorry that, that's more about you than them. You've made it about how angry you are, not how much change you want to create.
I agree 100%. So as we wind this down, Bobby, you have any final words or thoughts you'd like to share with the people out here?
I mean, for activism, I really think that we need to be understanding. When I say that, I get, the response that, my compassion, I save my compassion for the animals. Well, compassion isn't something that needs to be rationed, right? There's enough to go around. There's enough to go around, and there's enough to offer the person you're talking to, right? Validate what they say, because you weren't born vegan. You can understand why they like to go to McDonald's. You can just be honest with yourself. And when you do that, they're going to listen to you, and you're going to have more of an impact. And your impact needs to be not, I'm going to go turn a stranger vegan in a 5-minute conversation. Your impact should be, I'm going to go get someone to listen to what I have to say, right? That is going to be the way you can create. It's not about changing someone entirely. That's unreasonable, right? Get them to listen, create tiny shifts in consciousness for them, right? Get a little bit of dirt off the glass, let a little more light in for them, and hope that continues along their journey.
Right.
And I think that if we do that, we'll be more productive. We'll have less shaming and counterproductive activism.
Well, I can't thank my guest, Bobby Sud, enough tonight, and really for coming and sharing his heart, his work, his compassion, and his loving view of how we can integrate activism into our lives and work toward this goal of getting people away from harming the planet, animals, and themselves in this process. And this path can really help you do that. And I really want to thank the people that have joined us today, because without you, we can't do what we do. And I want to thank you for being part of this really active, healthy community of the National Health Association. And on behalf of the NHA, I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Health Science Podcast. Bobby, thank you so much. I so appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate the honor, and I'm honored to be on the show.
You've been listening to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association. Thank you for joining us today and for your commitment to evidence-based health science that backs a whole food, plant-exclusive lifestyle and contributes to the well-being of all people, animals, and our environment. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino. Be sure to leave a rating and a review, and we'll see you on the next show.